All of us will either have or know someone who has ginger hair. Today I want to talk about the genetics behind ginger hair, why it is that some people have children that are red-headed and some people don't, why it hasn't died out or whether it's going to, and maybe some of the advantages and disadvantages of it. Now, whether you have ginger hair or not will depend to some extent on where you live. The country with the most ginger-haired people is Scotland, where 13% of people have ginger or red hair, and 40% of the population carry the gene for it. In other parts of the world, particularly, for example, in East Asia, it's very, very rare, and you don't get very much at all. Overall, across the planet, 1% to 2% of people carry the two genes for red hair, and so they exhibit the red hair characteristic. Now, I need to explain a little bit of basic genetics as to how you end up with red hair or not. Now, you inherit two copies of every gene, one from your mother and one from your father. And depending on what those are, depends on what proteins get expressed, because the genes code for proteins, and proteins are the things that actually do things. They exhibit a phenotype, which is red hair is one of. So it's basically a sign of what your genetics produce. Now, genes can come primarily in either a dominant form or a recessive form. And the dominant one, if there's two, is the one that is dominant. So there's been one gene particularly identified on chromosome 16 inside humans, and this one is something which causes a change in a protein called the melanocortin-1 receptor, or MC1R, and it's this that is thought to produce the ginger hair. Now, if you inherit two dominant genes for non-ginger hair, one from your mum, one from your father, then you won't have ginger hair. If you inherit one ginger gene and one non-ginger gene, that can be from your mum, your father, or vice versa, then the non-ginger one is the dominant one, and so you still won't have ginger hair, although you'll be a carrier. However, if you receive a ginger gene, a recessive ginger gene from your mum, and a recessive ginger gene from your father, then you will express ginger hair, and that's why people have red hair. However, it's not quite that simple. The idea that one gene affects one characteristic is somewhat simplistic, and unfortunately, well, actually, it doesn't really matter, but whether it's fortunate or not, it's not true. The genetics of it are much more complicated than that. Inside each one of your cells is a genetic code in the DNA that's got millions and millions of bases. Now, these bases all code for amino acids, which make proteins, which express things in your body. So three bases, so it's A, T, C, or G, adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine, code for one amino acid, of which there are just over 20. And those amino acids get built up into proteins, and it's those proteins which do things in your cell. Now, as great as it would be just to have one genetic change making that big difference for auburn hair, actually it's a little bit more complicated than that, to the extent that we're not actually sure exactly what all the genes involved are. So there is more than just one ginger gene, so to speak. But there is primarily one ginger gene, which we know at the moment causes the majority of cases. But I explained the complexity behind it because it's that reason why you don't have one standard hair colour, but in fact there's a great variation in range from auburn, strawberry blonde, etc., right through to brown and blonde and other hair colours that you might have. And so these are to do with the expression of pheomelanin, which is higher in ginger people, and the expression of eumelanin, which is lower. Now, these things have knock-on effects, and these have been linked with various advantages and disadvantages of having ginger hair. Some of the advantages is the rarity of it. Certainly Professor Rees from the University of Edinburgh notes that we know the Romans, back in the times of the Roman Empire, particularly valued ginger hair, which they thought was particularly beautiful. And so they would tend to mate preferentially with people who had ginger hair. And so that was one reason that it proliferated in Western Europe, because the Romans had a particular fancy for it. Another reason is that over the decades, hair tends to get darker, everybody's hair, and it often moves through to grey, and sometimes it will fall out. And so red hair is a very striking colour, and that's thought to be associated with youth, and youth is something that people tend to find attractive, and it's another reason why red-headed people are tended to be found attractive. Actually, if you do have red or ginger hair, your hair will experience the most colour variation across your lifespan out of any hair colour. So it will often go from a striking red colour through to a brown, through to a dark brown, through to grey, and then it might fall out if you live that long. Other advantages include the fact that ginger hair is associated with fair skin, and this is to do with the lower levels of eumelanin in your body. It doesn't hold true in every case, but generally people with ginger hair do have fairer skin. Now, these people tend to produce more vitamin D, and this can be produced in low light conditions because of the way that their skin is. Now, vitamin D is an important vitamin. It's used to keep you healthy and it's protection against diseases such as rickets. And so in climates far from the equator where there's not a huge amount of sunlight, such as the United Kingdom where I live myself, then this can be an advantage because you can produce this vitamin D in low light conditions. And so you have an advantage over people with dark skin who will find it much more difficult in low light conditions to do that. And that is the reason why you tend to find less ginger people in the equator and more ginger people as you go either further north particularly, but also further south in our world. And that's because of the sunlight and the effects of the vitamin D. Recent research at McGill University in America has indicated that this protein, melanocortin 1 receptor, is where cell pigmentation comes from, and also has some kind of operation on the way that pain is experienced. Now, it's a common anecdotal thing from people who have red hair that they have a different tolerance to different types of pain, and there has been some evidence to promote this, that the view that they tend to be more sensitive to thermal pain, and this could be to do with lower vitamin K levels, but more tolerant of pain due to electrical stimuli, such as electric shocks. Now, that research is to do with the fact that one gene doesn't just change one thing in your body, and so whilst you might produce ginger hair, they might have knock-on effects on other proteins, on other expressions in your body, and so it is certainly within the realms of possibility that people with ginger hair have different tolerances to pain. However, the research on this is, again, really rather recent, the last decade or two, and so there's much work to be done before it can be fully understood why it is that ginger people report a different tolerance to pain. There are also disadvantages to having ginger hair, and this is primarily associated with a higher risk of skin cancer. This is because people with ginger hair often have more freckles and a lighter skin, which means that their body can be damaged more by the ultraviolet light which is found in the sun. The melanin in the skin, which they have less of, can increase the ultraviolet tolerance through sun tanning, but those with lower levels are less able to prevent the DNA damage that is caused by the sun. And so you do have an increased risk of skin cancer if you have ginger hair. But one thing I would like to stress is that this increased risk pales into insignificance compared to the increased risk in other activities such as smoking, being obese, or drinking too much alcohol. And so the relative risk is actually still quite small. So it's not something to be particularly worried about. However, it is something to bear in mind and to take precautions. In fact, where you come from in the world does have an effect on your skin cancer risk. For example, Celts, such as myself from Wales, have a higher risk of getting skin cancer than those people from England. And again, that's to do with a genetic predisposition to it. So those are some of the advantages and disadvantages. Now, one question that I got asked recently was, are ginger people in danger of dying out? Is there a possibility, because there are so few of them, that the genetics will mean that they eventually die out and nobody will mate with them? Now, the answer to that is no, we don't think it is going to die out at all. The reason for this is that it's not a big disadvantage to be ginger. It looks like it's not particularly an advantage or a disadvantage in terms of surviving long enough to procreate to have your own children. It's survived for many, many generations now. In fact, there were some Neanderthals discovered in France that are thought to be 45,000 years old that all had ginger hair, according to DNA analysis. That was a study produced in 2007. So it looks like ginger hair has been around for a long time, and there's certainly no sign of it dying out at the moment. If it's something that you're interested in, if you have ginger hair yourself, then you may be interested in the first Sunday of every September in the Netherlands. They have something called a Redhead Day, a big festival for people with ginger hair. Last year in 2008, they had 2,000 participants from 15 different nations, and it's promising to be bigger and better this year. So if you are available and you have ginger hair, I'm sure they'd appreciate you having a look in on them. So that's the genetics of ginger hair. That's some of the things that we understand at the moment in the scientific community. But there's probably a lot more characteristics associated with the ginger hair than we really understand at the moment. So my question for you this week is, can you think of designing an experiment that could test out further whether ginger hair people do have a higher tolerance to pain or not? Thank you for watching.